Today I want to talk a little bit about positive futures for AI. So this is a part of the series, this is the third in the series, and today I'm going to talk about context. I saw this graph last week, and amongst all the things that look exactly like all the other graphs that have been coming out about AI, something jumped out about this one, and that's what I want to talk about today. A lot of these graphs comparing different models, looking at the accuracy of a model, what they tend to prove is that against a number of different benchmarks that AI is improving. This isn't news. A lot of investments going into AI. It's unsurprising that we're seeing that kind of improvement given the amount of funding that's going in. A lot of that investment going into the US, a lot of that investment going into generative AI. What was significant for me was not that the growth is inevitable as a consequence of all the money that's going into it, or that the models are getting more complex. This is not, for example, about parameter count, which is an indication of how complex the models are, and it's not about the prompts we're using. While people are getting better at prompting, I don't think prompting is the edge of AI. The most significant thing about this graph was in the bottom corner, and that was what I've highlighted here. The axis here shows the growth in context window sizes. Those context windows started very small at about sort of 8K or 8,000 tokens and have expanded now where some of the premium models such as Google Gemini 1.5 Pro and 2.0 Pro are talking about 1 million, 1 million or 2 million context tokens. So what does that mean? Well, when you're having a chat with AI, this is what it might look like. So here you can see at the bottom I've labeled the prompt. This is where I put in my input, and I'm going to put in probably maybe a few sentences. I might ask it an elaborate question. I might be very specific about what kind of output I want from this discussion with AI. As I go through the discussion, it's not a one-off operation. I'm building up context. So when I ask multiple questions in the same chat, the AI that I'm interacting with is able to build up a picture of what it is that I'm interested in. That context traditionally has been built up by passing information in through the prompt, but it could be passed in whatever guise we want. We could actually start the chat with a whole load of context. Crucially, as the context windows have grown, we can give AI more information about the kind of things that we're interested in. So bigger context means that we can put in more words. Where before we were limited to an 8,000 token window, which would be a relatively small number of words, sort of about 500 or 600 words, we're now not limited in the same way. Bigger context windows means more words. In a 1 million token context window, that's equivalent to about 800,000 words. And for context, Shakespeare's complete works were I think about 880,000 words. So we're talking about a large volume of information. And the AI we're interacting with will consider all of that information as we're interacting with it. It's a little bit like its memory. There are issues with this. What these graphs show is broadly a downward trend, and what it means is that as the context window increases, some of the accuracy of the model decreases. But there's innovation in AI happening across multiple fields, and it's happening in this field too. This, for me, is the most exciting bit of what's going on in AI. Not about bigger parameter counts, and it's not about prompts. It's about context and how context is getting bigger and not less accurate. So while in some of these models we're seeing a drop-off, we're seeing models emerging now which are more robust. The most exciting bit of the graph I showed earlier is this bit. The red line is a new model released a couple of weeks ago from a Chinese company called Minimax. And what was significant about this Minimax model is that as the context window increases, the drop-off in performance, in accuracy, is only small. Here it's dropped off from about 96% to about 92%, and this will get better and better. What this means in real terms is that context is about to have a profound impact on the way we're interacting with AI. This is a quote from Ted Zhao on X. He said, "I can't emphasize enough how mind-blowing extremely long context windows are." And he went on to talk about how this is relevant for both researchers and practitioners, and that it's going to have a really long-term impact, not about just a few news cycles, which tends to be what this hype comes along as. So AI right now is very knowledgeable. An enormous amount of information has been boiled, if you like. The ocean has been boiled by the AI to produce the model, which is just a few 100 gigabytes in size. But it has nearly instant recall. It can reach any part of that model. And because it's connected to the internet, it's able to recall information that maybe it hasn't seen before. It's able to search for things with very, very advanced contextualized searches. It's very scalable. It's 24/7. I'm not pretending AI is perfect. It's still expensive, especially when you start interacting with it in the thousands or hundreds of thousands of chats. But it is getting better and better. We're seeing fewer hallucinations, and those hallucinations are problematic because it's fundamentally false information. But AI is developing the ability to verify what it's asserting and refer to sources and then present those sources with its findings. Crucially, it's constantly improving. And I think that's the most significant bit about what it means to businesses, organizations of all kinds of shapes and size. I mentioned the context window size earlier on, about 800,000 words. That's about 2,000 pages. And the crucial thing is what it's 2,000 pages of. It doesn't have to be 2,000 pages of my previous chats with that artificial intelligence. In fact, it could be a set of product briefs or technical manuals or electronic press kits. It could be any information about a company, the blogs published by the chief executive. It could be the marketing content of the website. It could be the entire intranet. It could be a set of well-chosen emails or roadmaps, plans for how products are going to be developed. It could be source code for how those products are actually coded. And AI can sweep up all of this information and use it to contextualize the model. And that means that these fast developing models we're seeing them from all over the world, these fast developing models can be used by companies in a very specific way. It's not just about the intelligence that's baked into the model now. It's about using the latest and greatest model, not necessarily trying to build the latest and greatest model because that's expensive, but using the latest and greatest model with a well-organized set of context in order to get really meaningful output from AI and therefore good outcomes. So specifically, that business context is going to be core business activity. It's about understanding how my company, your company, any organization is unique and using the information that I have in my company to contextualize all my interactions with AI. So up to now, I like to think that AI has been like a really smart new hire. I say really smart. Up to now, it's been a little bit touch and go, but it's getting smarter all the time. And I think we're about to see in 2025 a whole load of new models that have even better intelligence quotients. Models that are that much more useful because they are so bright. However, they've been like a new hire in that whenever I wanted to do anything with that model, whenever I've wanted to interact with that new member of staff, I've only been able to do it from the ground level. I've had to essentially train it up in anything that's relevant to my organization or my query in order to get something from it. Sometimes it's useful to have a new hire. Don't get me wrong, I'm not pretending that actually an organization should only be made up of people who've been there a long time, but there are certain activities that are the easiest undertaken by people who have just joined a company and other activities that are more easily undertaken by those who've been there a while and understood exactly how the company works and some of the background about how the products are made and how the customers are served. That's the change here, because AI is about to become like a real old timer. It's going to be able to know deeply what goes on inside an organization, how an organization works, what an organization's function is, and crucially, what its core business value is. And it's going to be able to answer questions from that perspective. And that's why context is so exciting. Now, there are loads of different ways through this. A lot of organizations, especially some of my clients who are a little bit larger, have been building their own models, pouring in a load of data, pouring in a load of compute, often at tremendous expense, and building models which they can then query. Now, I'm not saying that is the wrong approach at all, but there are limitations to it. If, as an organization, I invest a few £100,000, maybe even £1 million in the compute for a given model, then once that compute activity is done, the model is more or less fixed. Models tend not to evolve particularly. The way in which the model is generated evolves, but the model itself tends to be discarded. So For example, ChatGPT 4 is not fundamentally based on the compute used to generate ChatGPT 1. Now that's an expensive activity. Typically to either buy the GPUs that are used for processing this data at a cost of sort of £30,000 to £40,000 each, or to rent them in servers which contain a lot of these GPUs, is a very expensive activity. And that means that in order to build a model from scratch, it is an expensive activity. I wouldn't advocate for a small company to try and take that on. However, there are better options than this. Rather than build a model each time, where essentially each of my previous building activities are discarded, ChatGPT 4, for example, is not based on the compute that went into ChatGPT 1. There are better alternatives to pull in models that others have generated. The kind of models we're seeing now from the big providers, OpenAI, Mistral, Anthropic, Google, these are models that have taken typically between $5 and $8 million to generate, just in terms of the compute that's gone into them. Now that kind of investment for any organization is really significant, especially when it's a kind of once and done activity. The model has a short period of life, and while research into the model will in turn inform future models, it is fundamentally a limited activity. However, for other companies of different sizes, so small and medium-sized companies, which tends to be the kind of work I do, for those companies, it makes much more sense to bring in a model and use context windows to specialize that model. The advantage of this is you can bring in the model often on a pay-per-use basis, and then after a few weeks or a few months, when there is a better model, you can then bring in that model on a pay-per-use basis. There's not a massive capital expenditure required to actually build your own model here. Instead, it just becomes an operational expense of actually using the latest model, contextualizing it instantly with your data such that you can get great value out of it. Now, this all may sound like hype, and there's loads of AI hype. I saw this quote on Reddit where Ted had actually posted his statement about how exciting this work was on context windows, and this was the first comment in Reddit from Different Froyo. I really liked it because it just speaks to how exciting some of the hype is, and AI is on the hype cycle. So Gartner's hype cycle I think about all the time. There will be some kind of drop off in AI. I think that it might coincide with some kind of major financial issue later in the year, and when it does, the companies that have put enormous amounts into these models and maybe who haven't yet recouped that sort of investment are going to question whether they carry on investing. Now, like all hype cycles and like all crashes, there's always another side of it. There was a dot-com boom, and on the other side of it, that dot-com thinking now underpins all of the internet e-commerce that fuels so much of our economy today. So AI has a future. I don't think it is just a flash in the pan, of course. I think it's much more substantial than that. I think there will be some kind of drop, some kind of disillusionment. That trough of disillusionment that Gartner identified, I think, is a really good metaphor for this, because that's where we're going. But out the other side, I think it is going to improve. I liked it that when I put this quote into my talk today, AI came back to this. So this was the autocomplete that GPT-4 came up with. Pump it straight into my veins and let me feel the singularity coming. I thought that was slightly terrifying, but I do want to emphasize here, this is not about some intelligence that has deeply understood exactly what's happening in our world and has decided that actually we're close to an AI singularity. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. But instead, it has just noticed that when people talk about this hype and it being pumped into the veins and that the love of AI hype, they know that often it's talked about in the same breath as a singularity. When are we going to reach AGI? There are challenges here. All the things I've talked about are only exciting if we can keep in mind the reality of what's got to follow. This context that I'm talking about requires really good data. Like so much of the big data revolution of sort of 20 years ago, we are only able to do these things with AI if, as organizations, we're able to surface really good, relevant, high quality information, information that has a high level of semantic processing. We know exactly what it means. We know how to explain what it means. It's well structured. There is an information hierarchy that explains the links within that information. Crucially, that's information that's connected to business process, because the only thing that's really useful about AI is when it can help us run our businesses or organizations. That's the crucial element of it. And without data to do that, without data that's able to turn an AI from a new hire into an old timer, then it's really just an interesting thing. Not without value in and of itself, but not as much value as it could be when it starts interacting with our businesses in ways that can actually really help. As with all these things, my experience working with clients is that there are different levels of maturity. There are different levels of data development in the organization. Some organizations have very highly structured data environments where all aspects of staff contributions are being pulled into a well-organized information management system and can be pulled out in a variety of different ways, so that it's possible to track from the very first interaction with the customer right through to the current or most recent interaction with that customer, exactly how they've developed and how they've interacted with the products or services on offer from the business. Some companies have invested in that, and yours may be one of them. So maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you took that jump and invested in that such that you've got your 800,000 words ready to go. And if you wanted to start using, let's say Google Gemini 2.0 Pro, which will probably drop in the next couple of weeks, you'd be in a position to take advantage of its 2 million context window, 2 million token context window right away. So 2 million would be close to 1.6 million words. It's a lot of information to ask of a company, but maybe yours is in that place. If for any reason it's not, then please get in touch, because I think I could help.